We live in a world of relentless solicitation. Every street corner, every influencer interaction is an attempt to sell us something. We often react to this with cynicism, calling out grifters or scam artists who seek to make money off us with no consideration to our well-being. We view these people as bad actors, perhaps, as aberrations or parasites on what is otherwise a healthy body. But maybe the issue of the grifter allows us to see it in a completely different light. Because if we're always being sold to, then this would indicate the nature of the way how we are given to other people. So in a world where the human being has been reduced into a credit instrument or a demand center, the act of grifting or making money off people with no consideration for the person is not an anomaly. And so to understand why we are always a target is to understand the way how we are presented to the world. And so we have to look at it through the lens of our everydayness. We are not indivisible people, but we are credit instruments. We are marginally given in reference to life in order to seek a return for our actions. And so as a result of our seeking compensation for life, we set up a way of life that legitimizes the way that we are always sold to. So like any derivative or any credit instrument, we exist to be leveraged, to be traded, and to generate a yield. The purpose is not financial as much as what we would think it is, but it is existential. You as a person is subordinate to the form of life that is always transcendent. And so we think that we interact as people, but if we frame it along the lines of that we're all given as credit instruments, then you can always externalize people because you're a means towards an end that is always transcendent to the interaction. So the Faustian Pact legitimizes grifting or always being sold to. And so ultimately, if our first birth is not good enough, then when we become twice born through the use of a credit we are not the originators of, we ultimately are outsourcing the credit for our lives. And this sets the stage to always be sold to. And so we are always given as demand centers. And so it almost by default of our existential status requires a grifter. And the grifter is not an aberrance, but is literally just the manifestation of the internal logic of the whole systems, because we're always the mark. And yet, if we look at it along those lines, there's a sense of irony in that everybody rails against always being sold to, advertising, and the way how our data is used to profile us. And yet, if we stop to reflect upon why that it's legitimized, then ultimately this would reveal the nature of our status and the fact that we produce ourselves as demand centers that necessitates that we be sold to. We are orientated towards becoming advertising. So, if we're not actualizing the function of the credit instrument, then what are we given for? So if we're sold a lifestyle, status symbol, they're all value adds. We're not being tricked. We're being validated. All right. So the validation is in reference to ultimately the credit instrument that we produce ourselves. And this in turn validates the absencing of questioning or what you discount when you use a credit you are not the originator of. And so it ultimately validates our ignorance. So the grifter becomes a facilitator. They keep us in a closed loop, we could say, of our own production. And yet, so if we were to, think that the notion of the grifter is not aberrant, but is ultimately, it's the primary function of the system, let's look at it in reference to the main con game in our paradigm. And so therefore, give a context to what was the microcosm of a grifter in reference to the primary one that we all need to address. And that would be through central banking and the high priests of what is a metacon. So if we produce ourselves as credit instruments, ultimately we extend goodwill to a system that allows the marketing of the credit that we use in order to validate the totalizing claim of a buyer's journey, so in order for us to always be sold to. And so if you think of the con game of the people that issue credit, their con is to legitimize themselves as the originators of the credit, and so market their proficiency in reference to the life that you presuppose. If we look at central bankers or the high priest of finance is nothing but marketing or the con job, the con job is obviously to keep us invested in the consumer vehicle that is necessary in order to legitimize them. So they are contingent, and that always requires the marketing of their proficiency, or the way how that they're going to calm the markets, the way how that everything's orientated towards confidence measures, obviously to maintain, and through doing so, that launders the fiction. All right, so ultimately we know that central bankers create credit out of thin air, and this very credit we use obviously leverages our lives, and yet we launder the fiction or the magical production of the consumer through the animating of our actions as money making. And so in turn our money making is the way how that we discount the questioning necessary to see that their function is based upon existential arbitrage, or the Faustian pact that we engage with, which is primary. Through outsourcing the animating principle for life, through being twice born through the use of a credit we are not the originators of, what we have collectively agreed on, or we have validate, is that the origination of our lives comes with the technocratic kind of arrogation of say, proficiency in reference to the credit instruments that we are managed as. And so this reveals that the con of the central banking and central bankers, or the caste of finance in particular, are the biggest set of grifters on the face of the planet, because they perform a miracle. They speak, they obviously miraculate credit without any connection to your actions. And so therefore the value that they miraculate is in reference to the buyer's journey it legitimizes. And so this is the usurpation of the animating principle for life, because it legitimizes life as a compensation, or essentially the redemption as being a monetary phenomenon and not a spiritual phenomenon. And so because ultimately through the usurpation of the spirit, their job is to manage consumer confidence, or even investors. They don't give a fucking shit about even consumers. They only care about their investors. But that's just literally just a euphemism for managing the faith of the bad faith that we live our lives by. So this is inextricably connected to the worldview or our unavowed religiosity. They are there to solicit us to continually believe in the whole system, obviously when it's at the expense of our lives. And because the value is always through the proxy, or what is not direct, but through the mediation, or through the arbiters basically of our fate, when we outsource the credit for our lives through legitimizing the use of the credit that these people issue. So we can say that all the little grifters in the world, they can be accumulated into that one primary grift of using a credit we are not the originators of. This is the ultimate grift in convincing us that our way of life, we are indebted, all right, to these people, and that if we did not have them, that somehow our lives would be bereft, we would be floating, we would be adrift. And so if you can't see that the grifter is not an aberration, but is very much just the manifestation of the internal logic of our entire way of life, then you ultimately won't understand the necessary questions in order to reveal your existential status. Because you have to be given as a credit instrument first, so that legitimize the way how you are sold to, in order for people to sell you a con. Okay, so if you don't connect it to that, then you won't understand the nature of grifting, or what is the primary grift that we're beholden to. And so this would, if we're looking at what would be beyond grifting, well, it means to say that if you're given as a credit instrument or a demand center, an interchangeable economic agent, you have to look at the way how that you potentialize your actions beyond money making by crediting yourself with an agency that you're otherwise not credited when you're given as a demand center. We can only be sold to, and the reason why we're sold is we're sold not to see. We're sold to externalise where we are when we're beholden to an undervalued tokenism or the no place for the market for our time, and we are sold not to see that ultimately what we externalise or what we refuse to question. And so this gives us an ability to view the whole entire paradigm as one meta grift.